The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as King Edmund Ashworth made his way through the grand corridors. At 68, he carried himself with the dignity befitting a monarch who had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria for over 2 decades. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy uniform adorned with ceremonial medals that caught the light with each measured step. Yet beneath his composed exterior, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the royal family. Edmund had always prided himself on being a fair and just ruler. The people of Valdoria respected him for his dedication to the crown and his unwavering commitment to duty. His marriage to Queen Consort Isabella had been arranged decades ago, a political alliance that had strengthened ties between Valdoria and the neighboring kingdom of Astoria. While their relationship had never bloomed into passionate love, they had maintained a respectful partnership that served the crown well. Isabella Montclair had entered the royal family as a young woman of 25, bringing with her the grace and poise expected of future royalty. Her auburn hair and emerald eyes had captivated the court, and her intelligence had impressed even the most skeptical nobles. She had adapted to royal life with remarkable ease, mastering the intricate protocols and social expectations that came with her position. Over the years, she had become an integral part of the monarchy, handling charitable organizations and representing the crown at various state functions. The couple had produced 2 heirs, Prince Alexander, now 35 and married with children of his own, and Princess Catherine, 32, and recently engaged to a duke from a prominent family. Both children had grown up understanding their roles within the royal hierarchy and had never given their parents cause for concern. The royal family appeared, from the outside, to be a model of stability and tradition. However, appearances could be deceiving, and Edmund was about to discover just how much. It was Lord Chancellor William Hartwell who first brought the matter to the king's attention. Hartwell had served the crown faithfully for 15 years, managing the complex web of royal affairs and ensuring that the monarchy's reputation remained unblemished. He was a man of impeccable discretion, which made his obvious discomfort all the more alarming when he requested an urgent private audience with the king. "Your Majesty," Hartwell began, his usually steady voice betraying a slight tremor. "I'm afraid I must bring to your attention a matter of the utmost sensitivity. It concerns the Queen Consort, and I fear the implications could be quite serious." Edmund studied his chancellor's face carefully. In all their years of working together, he had never seen Hartwell this agitated. The older man's hands trembled slightly as he placed a sealed envelope on the king's desk, and his normally pale complexion had taken on an ashen quality. "What exactly are you telling me, William?" Edmund asked, his voice maintaining its royal composure despite the growing unease in his chest. Hartwell cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we have received information suggesting that Her Majesty has been conducting certain activities without the knowledge or approval of the royal household. These activities appear to involve significant financial transactions and communications with parties outside the kingdom." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Edmund felt his world begin to shift slightly off its axis. Isabella had always been involved in various charitable endeavors and international relations, but the gravity in Hartwell's tone suggested something far more serious than routine royal duties. "I'll need you to be more specific," Edmund said, though part of him dreaded what he was about to hear. Hartwell opened the envelope with careful precision, revealing a collection of documents and photographs. "Your Majesty, it appears that the Queen Consort has been secretly meeting with representatives from Mordania, our neighboring rival kingdom. These meetings have been taking place for several months, always in locations carefully chosen to avoid detection by our security services." Edmund's blood ran cold. Mordania had been a thorn in Valdoria's side for generations. While not openly hostile, the kingdom had consistently opposed Valdoria's policies and had been suspected of various covert operations designed to undermine their influence in the region. The idea that his own wife might be involved with such a kingdom was almost incomprehensible. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, "Our intelligence sources indicate that these meetings have involved the exchange of sensitive information about Valdoria's military capabilities, economic policies, and diplomatic strategies. We also have evidence of substantial sums of money being transferred to accounts controlled by the Queen Consort, funds that appear to originate from Mordanian sources." Edmund examined the documents with growing horror. Bank statements showed regular deposits of significant amounts, all from accounts traced back to shell companies with connections to the Mordanian government. Photographs captured Isabella in clandestine meetings with known Mordanian operatives, her face clearly visible despite obvious attempts at disguise. How long has this been going on? Edmund asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Based on our investigation, sir, approximately 18 months. The pattern suggests a gradual escalation, beginning with seemingly innocent cultural exchanges and evolving into the transfer of classified state information. The king felt as though the ground beneath his feet was crumbling. Isabella, the woman who had stood beside him for over 3 decades, who had shared his bed and raised his children, who had taken solemn vows to serve the crown with honor and loyalty, had been betraying everything they had built together. Is there any possibility of error in this intelligence? Edmund asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Hartwell shook his head gravely. I'm afraid not, Your Majesty. We have conducted extensive verification procedures. The evidence is overwhelming and indisputable. The Queen Consort has been systematically betraying state secrets to a foreign power in exchange for substantial financial compensation. Edmund rose from his chair and walked to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. Below, he could see Isabella tending to her roses, a scene that had played out countless mornings throughout their marriage. She appeared serene and content, completely unaware that her carefully constructed double life was about to come crashing down around her. The implications of this betrayal extended far beyond personal hurt. As Queen Consort, Isabella had access to classified information about military strategies, diplomatic negotiations, and economic policies. She attended private meetings with ministers and foreign dignitaries. She was privy to state secrets that could compromise national security if they fell into the wrong hands. Have you shared this information with anyone else? Edmund asked, still staring out at his unsuspecting wife. No, sir. I felt it was essential that you be informed first. However, I must stress that this situation requires immediate action. Every day that passes allows for potentially more damage to our national interests. Edmund understood the gravity of the situation all too well. As king, he had sworn an oath to protect his kingdom above all else, even above his personal relationships. The discovery of Isabella's treachery put him in an impossible position. She was not just his wife, but the mother of his heirs and a beloved figure among the people of Valdoria. What are our options? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. That depends on how Your Majesty wishes to handle the situation. We could pursue criminal charges for treason, which would result in a public trial and certain imprisonment. Alternatively, we could handle this matter privately, ensuring that the information doesn't become public knowledge while still addressing the security breach. Edmund knew that a public trial would be devastating not just for Isabella, but for the entire royal family. The scandal would rock the kingdom to its core and potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. His children would bear the shame of their mother's actions for the rest of their lives, and the royal succession could be called into question. Yet allowing a traitor to escape justice seemed equally unthinkable. As king, he had a duty to uphold the law and protect his kingdom from all threats, regardless of their source. I need time to consider our course of action, Edmund said finally. In the meantime, I want Isabella placed under discreet surveillance. I want to know every move she makes, every person she contacts, and I want all her access to classified information immediately suspended. Of course, Your Majesty. I'll arrange for the security measures to be implemented immediately. As Hartwell gathered his documents and prepared to leave, Edmund remained at the window, watching his wife among her beloved flowers. The woman who had shared his life for so many years had become a stranger, someone capable of betraying everything they had built together for the sake of money and foreign allegiance. The weight of kingship had never felt heavier than it did in that moment. He was faced with a choice that would define not just his reign but his legacy. How does a king deal with treason when the traitor shares his bed? How does a husband confront a wife who has betrayed not just him, but an entire kingdom? Edmund knew that before the sun set, he would have to confront Isabella with the evidence of her betrayal. The conversation would be one of the most difficult of his life, but it was necessary. The kingdom's security depended on it, and his duty as king demanded nothing less than complete transparency about the threat that had been living within the palace walls. As he watched Isabella carefully pruning a particularly beautiful red rose, Edmund wondered if she had any idea that her world was about to change forever. In a few hours, she would no longer be the respected queen consort of Valdoria. Instead, she would be revealed as a traitor whose actions had endangered everything the royal family stood for. The morning sun continued to shine brightly over the palace gardens, but For King Edmund Ashworth, the day had already grown dark with the weight of betrayal and the impossible choices that lay ahead. The afternoon light filtered through the ornate stained glass windows of the king's private study as Edmund paced behind his mahogany desk. The damning documents spread before him like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture he never wanted to see. Each bank statement, each photograph, each intercepted communication painted a clearer portrait of betrayal that cut deeper than any enemy's sword. Lord Chancellor Hartwell had departed hours ago, leaving Edmund alone with the weight of his discovery. The king had cancelled his afternoon appointments, claiming a sudden headache, which wasn't entirely untrue. His head did throb with the magnitude of what he had learned, and, more importantly, with what he now had to do. Edmund had spent the time since Hartwell's departure reviewing every detail of the evidence, hoping against hope that he might find some alternative explanation for Isabella's actions. Perhaps there was some misunderstanding, some complex diplomatic maneuver he wasn't aware of. But each document only confirmed what he already knew in his heart. His wife of 33 years had been systematically betraying their kingdom. The financial records were particularly damning. Over the past 18 months, Isabella had received payments totaling nearly 2 million Valdorian crowns, all from accounts linked to the Mordanian intelligence service. The amounts had started small, perhaps testing her willingness to cooperate, but had grown substantially as she provided more valuable information. What made the betrayal even more painful was the methodical nature of it. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single lapse in judgment. Isabella had carefully planned each meeting, each exchange of information. She had created elaborate cover stories for her absences from the palace, claiming to visit friends or attend charity events that never existed. She had opened secret bank accounts under false names and had even gone so far as to learn basic encryption techniques to communicate with her Mordanian handlers. A soft knock at the study door interrupted Edmund's dark thoughts. "Enter," he called out, quickly covering the sensitive documents. "Your Majesty," announced his personal secretary, James Morrison, "the Queen Consort has returned from her afternoon garden party and is asking to speak with you." She mentioned it was regarding the upcoming state visit from the Asturian delegation. Edmund's stomach clenched. The Asturian delegation was arriving next week for crucial trade negotiations, talks that could significantly impact Valdoria's economic future. If Isabella had already passed information about these negotiations to Mordania, the kingdom's bargaining position could be severely compromised. "Tell Her Majesty that I'll see her in 20 minutes, Edmund replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And, James, please ensure we are not disturbed once she arrives." As Morrison departed, Edmund realized that the moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. He had planned to wait until evening, perhaps after dinner when the palace was quieter, but fate had decided otherwise. He carefully organized the evidence into a neat pile, then locked it in his desk drawer. This first conversation with Isabella needed to be carefully managed. He couldn't reveal everything he knew, not yet, but he needed to gauge her reactions and see if she might confess voluntarily. When Isabella entered the study 20 minutes later, Edmund was struck by how normal she appeared. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her cream-colored dress immaculate, her emerald eyes bright with what seemed like genuine affection for her husband. She moved with the same graceful confidence that had first attracted him decades ago, and, for a moment, Edmund almost doubted the evidence he had seen. "Edmund, darling," she said, approaching his desk with a warm smile. "I hope your headache is better. James mentioned you had to cancel your afternoon meetings." Her concern seemed genuine, and Edmund found himself wondering how someone could compartmentalize so completely. How could she betray him and their kingdom while simultaneously playing the role of loving, devoted wife so convincingly? "I'm feeling much better, thank you," Edmund replied, gesturing for her to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "You mentioned wanting to discuss the Asturian visit?" Isabella settled gracefully into the chair, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. "Yes, I wanted to confirm the details for the welcome banquet. I've been working with the kitchen staff and the protocol office to ensure everything is perfect for Ambassador Thornfield and his delegation." Edmund watched her carefully as she spoke, searching for any sign of deception or nervousness. But Isabella's performance was flawless. She discussed seating arrangements, menu selections, and entertainment options with the same attention to detail she had always shown for state functions. "You seem very well informed about the delegation's preferences," Edmund observed, keeping his tone casual. "Have you had much contact with Ambassador Thornfield's office?" "Oh, Just the usual coordination through diplomatic channels, Isabella replied smoothly. I've exchanged a few letters with his wife about cultural interests and dietary restrictions. Nothing too detailed, of course. The ease with which she lied was almost impressive. Edmund knew from the intercepted communications that Isabella had been in contact with Mordanian agents about the Asturian visit, providing detailed information about the delegation's security arrangements and the specific topics that would be discussed during the trade negotiations. I've been thinking, Edmund said, leaning back in his chair. Perhaps we should review our security protocols for the visit. There have been some concerns raised about potential intelligence gathering by foreign operatives. For just a moment, Edmund thought he saw a flicker of something in Isabella's eyes. Alarm, perhaps, or calculation. But it passed so quickly he couldn't be certain. That sounds very prudent, she agreed. One can never be too careful these days. The world seems to be full of people who would exploit any opportunity for their own gain. The irony of her words was almost too much to bear. Edmund felt a surge of anger that he had to consciously suppress. How could she sit there, speaking about exploitation and betrayal, when she was guilty of exactly those crimes? Indeed, he replied carefully. Trust is such a precious commodity, especially in our position. When someone betrays that trust, the consequences can be devastating, not just for the individuals involved, but for the entire kingdom. Isabella nodded earnestly. Absolutely. That's why it's so important that we maintain the highest standards of loyalty and integrity. The people of Valdoria depend on us to put their interests above our own. Edmund had to admire her nerve, even as it disgusted him. She spoke about loyalty and integrity while sitting across from the very man she had been betraying for 18 months. The performance was so convincing that if he hadn't seen the evidence with his own eyes, he might have believed her completely. Speaking of maintaining high standards, Edmund continued, I've been reviewing some of our household finances lately. There seem to be some discrepancies in the charitable accounts that I'd like you to help me understand. This time, there was no mistaking the brief flash of panic that crossed Isabella's features. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to escape Edmund's notice. Discrepancies? She asked, her voice just a touch higher than usual. What sort of discrepancies? Nothing too concerning, I'm sure, Edmund replied, watching her reaction carefully. Just some unusual transactions that our accountants flagged for review. Large deposits and withdrawals that don't seem to correspond with our usual charitable activities. Isabella shifted slightly in her chair, the first sign of physical discomfort she had shown since entering the room. Well, I do handle quite a few charitable initiatives. Sometimes the timing of donations and disbursements can create unusual patterns in the accounts. I'd be happy to review the details with the accountants if you think it would be helpful. That won't be necessary, Edmund said quickly. I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. After all, your dedication to charitable work has always been exemplary. Relief flooded Isabella's features, and she visibly relaxed back into her chair. She had no idea that Edmund was simply testing her reactions, gathering intelligence about how she might respond when confronted with the full scope of her betrayal. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss about the Asturian visit? Isabella asked, apparently eager to move away from the topic of financial discrepancies. Actually, yes, Edmund replied. I'd like you to postpone any further coordination with outside parties until after the delegation departs. I want to minimize the number of people who have detailed information about the visit. Isabella's face went pale. If she was indeed passing information to Mordanian operatives, this directive would seriously compromise her ability to do so. Her handlers would expect regular updates about the preparations and any changes to the schedule. Of course, she managed, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I understand the importance of maintaining security. I'll ensure that all further coordination goes through the proper diplomatic channels. Edmund nodded, satisfied that he had successfully limited Isabella's access to new information without revealing the true reason for his caution. Excellent. I knew I could count on your cooperation. As they continued to discuss minor details about the state visit, Edmund found himself studying his wife with new eyes. How many times over the years had she sat in this very chair, listening to him discuss matters of state, only to relay that information to foreign operatives? How many state secrets had been compromised because he had trusted the wrong person? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering various topics related to upcoming royal engagements and diplomatic functions. Throughout it all, Isabella maintained her composure admirably, but Edmund could see the subtle signs of stress that she was trying to hide. The way she occasionally touched her throat, the slight tremor in her hands when she reached for her teacup, the barely perceptible changes in her breathing pattern. When Isabella finally excused herself to prepare for dinner, Edmund felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The woman he had married, the mother of his children, the person he had trusted above all others, had revealed herself to be someone he didn't know at all. Alone again in his study, Edmund retrieved the evidence from his desk drawer and spread it out once more. The photographs of Isabella meeting with Mordanian operatives seemed even more damning now that he had seen her perform her role as innocent wife so convincingly. If she could lie to his face with such skill, what else might she be capable of? The implications extended far beyond their personal relationship. As queen consort, Isabella had been involved in virtually every aspect of royal life. She had attended confidential briefings, participated in strategic planning sessions, and been privy to sensitive information about everything from military deployments to economic policies. The damage she could have caused to Valdoria's national interests was immeasurable. Edmund knew that he needed to act quickly to minimize any further harm. But he also knew that his next steps would have to be carefully considered. The wrong move could not only compromise ongoing investigations, but could also trigger a constitutional crisis that might threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. As the sun began to set over the palace grounds, casting long shadows across his study, Edmund Ashworth faced the most difficult decision of his reign. The woman sleeping in the Queen's chambers was not just his wife, but a traitor to the crown. And, tomorrow, he would have to decide how to balance his duties as king with the painful reality that the person he had loved and trusted for over 3 decades had betrayed everything they had built together. The royal dining hall felt unusually tense that evening as Edmund sat across from Isabella at the long mahogany table that had hosted countless state dinners and family celebrations. The golden candelabras cast flickering shadows across the ornate walls, and the usual soft conversation between the royal couple was replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to echo in the vast space. Isabella had noticed her husband's distant behavior immediately. Throughout their 33 years of marriage, she had become expertly attuned to his moods and mannerisms. Tonight, something was clearly troubling him beyond the headache he had claimed earlier. His responses to her attempts at conversation were terse and distracted, and he kept watching her with an intensity that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Edmund," she said finally, setting down her fork and reaching across the table toward his hand, "you've barely touched your dinner. Are you feeling unwell again?" Edmund looked down at his plate, realizing that he had indeed been merely pushing the food around rather than eating. His appetite had vanished completely since his conversation with Lord Chancellor Hartwell. Every time he looked at Isabella, he saw not the elegant queen consort he had married, but the traitor revealed in those damning photographs and documents. "I have a great deal on my mind," he replied, pulling his hand away from hers and reaching for his wine glass. Affairs of state can be quite consuming. Isabella studied his face carefully. In all their years together, she had rarely seen him this troubled. Even during the most challenging periods of his reign, he had maintained his composure and had often confided in her about his concerns. This withdrawal was distinctly unlike him. "Perhaps I could help," she offered, her voice taking on the sympathetic tone she had perfected over decades of royal marriage. "You know I'm always happy to listen if you need to discuss something that's troubling you." The offer was so perfectly delivered, so seemingly sincere, that Edmund almost laughed at the dark irony of it. Here was the woman who had been betraying state secrets for 18 months, offering to help him with affairs of state. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'm not sure this is something you could assist with," he replied carefully. "It involves sensitive security matters that are best kept within a very small circle." Isabella's expression didn't change, but Edmund noticed that her grip on her wine glass had tightened slightly. If she was indeed the traitor the evidence suggested, then his mention of security matters would naturally cause her concern. "Of course," she said smoothly. "I understand completely. Security is paramount, especially with the Astrian delegation arriving next week." Edmund seized on her mention of the delegation. "Yes, the Astorians. Tell me, have you had any unusual contacts regarding their visit? Anyone asking questions that seemed inappropriate or overly detailed?" The question was designed to test her response, to see if she might reveal any guilt or nervousness about her activities. Isabella considered for a moment before answering, and Edmund could almost see her calculating her response. "No, nothing unusual," she replied. "Just the standard coordination with their advance team, and some correspondence with Ambassador Thornfield's wife, as I mentioned earlier." "Why do you ask?" Our intelligence services have received reports about potential foreign interest in the visit, Edmund said, watching her reaction carefully. It seems that certain parties may be attempting to gather information about our negotiations with Astoria. Isabella nodded gravely, playing her role perfectly. How troubling. Is there anything specific I should be aware of? Any precautions I should take in my preparations for the visit? The performance was flawless, but Edmund could see through it now. Isabella's concern appeared genuine, but he knew it was motivated by self-preservation rather than genuine patriotism. She needed to know how much the intelligence services had discovered about foreign interest in the visit because she was the source of that interest. I think the most important thing is to be extremely careful about who has access to information about the delegation's schedule and the topics to be discussed, Edmund replied. We need to ensure that sensitive details don't fall into the wrong hands. Absolutely, Isabella agreed. Loose lips sink ships, as they say. It's crucial that everyone involved in the preparations understands the importance of discretion. Edmund had to admire her composure, even as it disgusted him. She was discussing the very security breaches she was responsible for with such conviction that anyone listening would believe she was deeply concerned about protecting state secrets. Their dinner continued with increasingly stilted conversation, neither party able to fully engage in the elaborate dance of diplomatic small talk that had once come so naturally to them. Isabella seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship, though she couldn't identify exactly what. Edmund, meanwhile, found himself analyzing every word she spoke, every gesture she made, looking for signs of the deception that he now knew lay beneath her perfect royal facade. After dinner, as was their custom, they retired to the smaller sitting room adjacent to their private quarters. Isabella settled into her favorite armchair with a book, while Edmund pretended to review papers from his desk. In reality, he was studying her from behind his reading glasses, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he had known with the traitor revealed by the evidence. Edmund, Isabella said suddenly, looking up from her book, I can't help but feel that something has changed between us today. Have I done something to upset you? The direct question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, laying out the evidence, and demanding an explanation. But Lord Chancellor Hartwell had warned him about the importance of maintaining operational security until they could determine the full extent of the damage Isabella had caused. I'm simply preoccupied with state matters, he replied, not meeting her eyes. There's nothing you've done wrong. But Isabella wasn't satisfied with his response. She set down her book and moved to the sofa beside his chair, her movements graceful despite the obvious concern in her expression. Edmund, we've been married for 33 years. I know when something is troubling you beyond the usual concerns of kingship. Please, talk to me. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. The sincerity in her voice was almost heartbreaking. If Edmund hadn't seen the evidence of her betrayal, he would have been moved by her apparent concern for their relationship. Instead, he found himself wondering how many times she had used this same tone, this same approach, to manipulate him into sharing information that she later passed to her Mordanian handlers. Isabella, he said finally, setting aside his papers and looking directly at her. How well do we really know each other? The question seemed to startle her. What do you mean? We've shared everything together for over 3 decades. We've raised children, built a life, ruled a kingdom side by side. We know each other better than anyone else in the world. Do we? Edmund asked, his voice quiet but intense. Sometimes I wonder if it's possible for 2 people to live so closely together and still harbor secrets from each other. Isabella's face went pale, and, for the first time that evening, her composed mask slipped slightly. Edmund, you're frightening me. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that I've been thinking about trust lately, he replied, watching her reaction carefully. About how fragile it is, and how devastating it can be when it's broken. About how someone could betray everything they claim to hold dear, and still look the person they've betrayed in the eye every single day. Isabella stood up abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly in the lamplight, and Edmund could see her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. Edmund, if you have something specific you want to ask me, please just ask it directly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This conversation is becoming quite distressing. Edmund joined her at the window, standing close enough that he could smell her familiar perfume, could see the familiar curve of her profile that he had memorized over decades of marriage. Yet she felt like a stranger to him now, someone he had never truly known. Very well, he said quietly. Isabella, Is there anything you need to tell me about your activities over the past year and a half? Anything that you think might concern me as your husband or as king?" The question hung in the air between them like a sword. Isabella turned to face him, and Edmund could see in her eyes that she was calculating furiously, trying to determine how much he might know and how much she could safely reveal or deny. "I don't understand what you're asking," she said finally. "My activities have been the same as always. Charitable work, royal duties, family obligations. I'm not aware of anything that should concern you." Edmund felt something break inside his chest. Even now, faced with a direct question and an opportunity to confess, Isabella chose to continue lying. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and yet she persisted in her deception, looking him directly in the eye while denying everything. "I see," he said simply, stepping back from her. "Then, I suppose there's nothing more to discuss tonight." Isabella reached out toward him, her confusion and distress apparent. "Edmund, please, I don't understand what's happening here. If I've done something wrong, if I failed you in some way, please tell me so I can make it right." "Some things can't be made right, Isabella," he replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his discovery. "Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal." With that, he left her standing alone by the window, her reflection a pale ghost in the darkness outside. As Edmund made his way to his private study, he could hear Isabella calling after him, but he didn't turn back. He had given her every opportunity to confess, to show some trace of the honor and integrity he had once believed she possessed. Instead, she had chosen to compound her treachery with continued lies. In his study, Edmund retrieved the evidence once again and spread it across his desk under the bright lamplight. Tomorrow, he would have to make the most difficult decision of his reign. The woman he had loved and trusted for over 3 decades was a traitor to the crown, and no amount of personal history or emotional attachment could change that fundamental fact. As king, he had sworn an oath to protect Valdoria above all else, including his own family. That oath would now be put to its ultimate test. Isabella had made her choice when she decided to betray her kingdom for Mordanian gold. Now Edmund would have to make his choice about how to respond to that betrayal. The night stretched ahead of him, long and sleepless, as he contemplated the end of his marriage and the beginning of a scandal that would rock the very foundations of the Valdorian monarchy. Dawn broke gray and somber over Ravencrest Palace as King Edmund sat in his study, having spent the entire night wrestling with the most momentous decision of his reign. The evidence of Isabella's betrayal lay scattered across his desk like pieces of a shattered mirror, each document reflecting a different aspect of his wife's treachery. Empty coffee cups and the remains of a barely touched breakfast tray testified to his sleepless vigil. At 7 o'clock sharp, Lord Chancellor Hartwell arrived for their scheduled meeting, his usually pristine appearance showing subtle signs of his own sleepless night. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his normally perfect posture betrayed the weight of the crisis they faced together. "Your Majesty," Hartwell said as he entered the study, "I trust you've had time to consider our discussion yesterday?" Edmund looked up from the documents, his face drawn and aged by the burden of what he had learned. "I've thought of little else, William. Tell me, have there been any new developments overnight?" Hartwell settled into the chair across from the king's desk, his expression grave. "I'm afraid so, sir. Our surveillance teams intercepted a communication from the Queen Consort to her Mordanian contact early this morning. It appears she's attempting to arrange an emergency meeting." Edmund felt his heart sink even further. Even after their tense conversation the previous evening, Isabella was still actively working with foreign operatives. Any hope he might have harbored that this was all some terrible misunderstanding vanished completely. "What did the communication say?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. She informed her handler that security around the Asturian delegation has been increased, and that her access to information may be limited. She requested guidance on how to proceed, and expressed concern about potential exposure. The methodical nature of Isabella's activities struck Edmund like a physical blow. She wasn't just passing along information opportunistically. She was operating like a trained intelligence asset, maintaining regular contact with her handlers and actively seeking ways to continue her espionage activities even when circumstances became challenging. "There's more, Your Majesty," Hartwell continued reluctantly. "Our technical teams have discovered that the Queen Consort has been using sophisticated encryption software to communicate with her contacts. This suggests a level of training and preparation that goes far beyond amateur opportunism." Edmund processed this information slowly. The woman he had shared his life with for over 3 decades wasn't simply someone who had been recruited or coerced into betraying state secrets. She was apparently a skilled operative who had systematically infiltrated the highest levels of the Valdorian government by marrying its king. How long have you suspected her of this level of sophistication? Edmund asked. The full scope of her activities has only become clear in the past 24 hours, Hartwell admitted. Initially, we suspected she might be a target of foreign influence, someone who had been manipulated or blackmailed into cooperation. But the evidence suggests something far more deliberate and long-term. The implications were staggering. If Isabella had been a Mordanian operative from the beginning, then their entire marriage might have been built on deception. Every intimate moment, every shared confidence, every decision they had made together about their children and their kingdom might have been calculated moves in a decades-long intelligence operation. What about our children? Edmund asked, voicing one of his deepest fears. Could they be involved in this? Hartwell shook his head quickly. We found no evidence to suggest that Prince Alexander or Princess Catherine have any knowledge of their mother's activities. All indications are that they are completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Edmund felt a surge of relief. Whatever Isabella had done, at least their children had been spared involvement in her betrayal. But the relief was short-lived as he considered how devastating this revelation would be for Alexander and Catherine. Learning that their mother was a traitor would shatter their understanding of their family and their own place in the world. Have you prepared recommendations for how we should proceed? Edmund asked. Hartwell opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. I've consulted with our legal advisors, security chiefs, and constitutional experts. We have several options, but each carries significant risks and complications. Edmund gestured for him to continue, bracing himself for what he was about to hear. Option 1 is a full criminal prosecution for treason. The Queen Consort would be arrested, charged, and tried in open court. This would satisfy the legal requirements for addressing such serious crimes, but it would also create a massive public scandal that could destabilize the monarchy. Edmund winced at the thought of Isabella being dragged from the palace in handcuffs, of their private life being dissected in newspaper headlines around the world. The damage to the royal family's reputation would be immense, and the political ramifications could be severe. Option 2, Hartwell continued, is to handle this matter through private diplomatic channels. We could arrange for the Queen Consort to quietly leave the country and never return, perhaps under the pretense of seeking treatment for a medical condition. This would avoid a public scandal, but might be seen as failing to properly address such serious crimes. Edmund considered this alternative. While it would spare the royal family public humiliation, it would also mean that Isabella would escape any real consequences for her actions. The idea of allowing a traitor to simply disappear into comfortable exile was deeply troubling from both a legal and moral standpoint. What's the third option? He asked. We could arrange for a private trial within the royal household, Hartwell explained. The Queen Consort would face formal charges, but the proceedings would be conducted in secret. If found guilty, she could be stripped of her titles and imprisoned within a secure royal facility. This would ensure justice while maintaining some degree of privacy. Edmund found himself drawn to this compromise solution, but he suspected there might be legal challenges to such an approach. Is such a trial constitutionally valid? There is precedent for handling serious crimes within the royal family through private proceedings, Hartwell confirmed. However, it would require careful legal preparation to ensure that any conviction could withstand future challenges. As they discussed the various options, Edmund found himself thinking about Isabella herself. Whatever she had done, she was still the mother of his children and the woman he had loved for over 3 decades. Even knowing what he now knew about her true nature, he couldn't completely abandon the hope that there might be some explanation for her actions that he hadn't considered. Before we make any final decisions, Edmund said slowly, I think I need to confront her directly with the evidence. I need to hear her explanation for what she's done. Hartwell looked concerned. Your Majesty, that could be quite dangerous. If the Queen Consort realizes that her activities have been discovered, she might attempt to flee the country or destroy evidence. We could lose the opportunity to fully understand the scope of the damage she's caused. Nevertheless, Edmund replied firmly, I owe it to our marriage and to my own sense of justice to give her one final chance to explain herself. Perhaps there are circumstances we don't understand, or perhaps she'll be willing to cooperate in minimizing the damage she's caused. Hartwell nodded reluctantly. If you're determined to proceed with such a confrontation, I would recommend that it take place under controlled circumstances. We should have security personnel nearby, and we should ensure that she has no opportunity to communicate with her handlers or destroy any evidence. Edmund agreed to these precautions, though the idea of treating his own wife as a security threat felt surreal. Just 48 hours ago, Isabella had been his trusted partner and closest confidant. Now she was being discussed like a dangerous criminal who couldn't be trusted in her own home. When would you like to arrange this confrontation? Hartwell asked. This afternoon, Edmund replied without hesitation. I want this resolved as quickly as possible. Every day we delay gives her more opportunities to cause additional damage. As Hartwell prepared to leave to make the necessary arrangements, Edmund called him back. William, I want you to know that whatever happens in the coming days, I appreciate your discretion and professionalism in handling this matter. I know this situation puts you in a very difficult position. Thank you, Your Majesty, Hartwell replied. I want you to know that everyone involved in this investigation shares your commitment to protecting the kingdom while handling this crisis with appropriate dignity. After Hartwell departed, Edmund remained alone in his study, staring out at the palace gardens where Isabella had been tending her roses just yesterday morning. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 48 hours ago, but his world had been turned completely upside down. The woman he thought he had married didn't really exist. In her place was someone he had never truly known, someone capable of betraying everything he held sacred. The confrontation ahead would be one of the most difficult conversations of his life, but it was necessary. Before he could decide how to proceed with Isabella's punishment, he needed to understand the full scope of her betrayal and whether there was any possibility of redemption or cooperation. As the morning wore on, Edmund found himself preparing for a conversation that would either provide some closure to this nightmare or confirm his worst fears about the woman he had trusted above all others. Either way, by the end of the day, his marriage would be over, and Isabella's fate would be sealed. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did as King Edmund prepared to confront the greatest betrayal of his life, knowing that the choices he made in the coming hours would define not only his own legacy, but the future of the Valdorian monarchy itself. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ornate Persian rug in the king's private study as Edmund arranged the damning evidence across his mahogany desk. Each document had been positioned with deliberate precision. Bank statements showing the Mordanian payments, photographs of Isabella's clandestine meetings, transcripts of intercepted communications, and detailed intelligence reports outlining the scope of her betrayal. The confrontation he had been dreading all day was about to begin. At precisely 3 o'clock, Isabella entered the study at Edmund's request, her usual grace evident in every step. She wore an elegant navy dress that brought out her emerald eyes, and her auburn hair was styled in the sophisticated chignon that had become her signature look. To any casual observer, she appeared to be the picture of royal dignity and composure. "You wanted to see me, darling?" she asked, approaching his desk with the warm smile that had once melted his heart but now felt like another layer of deception. "Please, sit down, Isabella," Edmund replied, his voice carefully controlled. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had performed her innocent act just yesterday. As Isabella settled herself gracefully, Edmund noticed her eyes briefly scanning the documents spread across his desk. He saw a flicker of recognition and alarm cross her features before she quickly composed herself, but it was too late. That momentary lapse confirmed everything he had been told about her guilt. "Isabella," Edmund began slowly, "I'm going to show you some documents, and I want you to explain them to me." He turned the first photograph toward her, a clear image of Isabella meeting with a known Mordanian operative outside a small cafe in the capital city. The photograph had been taken just 3 weeks ago, showing Isabella handing over what appeared to be an envelope while receiving a small package in return. Isabella's face went completely pale as she stared at the photograph. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique clock on Edmund's mantelpiece. When she finally looked up to meet his eyes, Edmund saw something he had never seen before. The mask of innocence had finally fallen away, revealing the calculating intelligence beneath. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not the question you should be asking," Edmund replied firmly. "The question is, how do you explain meeting with Mordanian intelligence operatives while serving as Queen Consort of Valdoria?" Isabella stared at him for another long moment, and Edmund could almost see her weighing her options. Could she continue to deny what was clearly visible in the photograph? Could she fabricate some explanation that might save her? Or was it finally time to abandon the pretense that had defined their marriage for over 3 decades? How long have you known? She asked finally, her voice taking on a different quality, harder, more businesslike, stripped of the warmth and affection that had always characterized her interactions with him. Long enough, Edmund replied. The question is, how long has this been going on? How long have you been betraying your country and your family? Isabella leaned back in her chair, and, for the first time since he had known her, Edmund saw who she really was. Gone was the loving wife and devoted mother. In her place sat someone who looked at him with cool calculation, someone who was evaluating how much damage had been done and what her options might be for salvaging the situation. 34 years, she said quietly. The number hit Edmund like a physical blow. 34 years meant that Isabella had been a Mordanian operative before they had even met, before their marriage, before the birth of their children. Everything, their entire relationship, their family, their shared life, had been built on a foundation of lies. Before our marriage? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Isabella nodded slowly. I was recruited while I was still in university. My handler identified you as a target when you were still heir apparent. The marriage was an assignment. Edmund felt the world shift beneath his feet. Every memory of their courtship, their wedding, their early years together was now tainted with the knowledge that it had all been orchestrated by a foreign intelligence service. The woman he had fallen in love with had never existed. She had been a carefully crafted persona designed to infiltrate the highest levels of the Valdorian government. Our children, he managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. Are they? Alexander and Catherine are your children in every way that matters, Isabella interrupted quickly. Whatever else I may have done, I love them completely. They have no knowledge of my activities, and they never have. Edmund studied her face, searching for any sign of deception in this claim. For the first time since the conversation began, Isabella's mask slipped to reveal genuine emotion, maternal love that appeared to be the only authentic feeling she had ever shown him. Why? He asked simply. Why did you do this to us? To our family? To our kingdom? Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that suggested she had been carrying this burden for far too long. At first, it was simply what I was trained to do, she said. I was young, idealistic, convinced that I was serving a greater cause. The marriage was supposed to be a short-term assignment, gather intelligence for a few years, and then find an excuse to leave. But you stayed, Edmund observed. I stayed because... Isabella paused, struggling with words that seemed foreign to her. Because despite everything, despite the lies and the deception, I found something I hadn't expected. You were kind to me, Edmund. You treated me with respect and dignity. When the children came, I discovered a capacity for love that I didn't know I possessed. Edmund felt a bitter laugh escape his lips. So you loved us, but you continued betraying us for 3 decades? Isabella's composure cracked slightly, and, for a moment, Edmund glimpsed what might have been genuine remorse. By the time I realized what I truly wanted, it was too late. Mordania had too much leverage over me. They knew about my real identity, about the false documents that had allowed me to marry you. They threatened to expose everything, to destroy not just me, but our children's legitimacy and your own ring. So you chose to continue serving them rather than confess to me, Edmund said. I convinced myself that I could limit the damage, Isabella replied defensively. I tried to give them information that was relatively harmless, intelligence that wouldn't seriously compromise Valdoria's interests. But, over the years, they demanded more and more. When I tried to resist, they reminded me of what they could do to our family. Edmund pulled out the bank statements, showing the substantial payments Isabella had received. And the money? How do you explain accepting payment for your betrayal? Isabella's face flushed with what appeared to be shame. They insisted on paying me, said it was standard procedure for all their assets. I tried to refuse at first, but they made it clear that refusing payment would make them suspicious of my motives. The money meant nothing to me. I never spent it on myself. Where did it go? Edmund asked. Anonymous donations to various charities, Isabella replied quietly. I couldn't bear to profit from what I was doing, so I tried to at least ensure that some good came from it. Edmund found himself almost impressed by this small gesture of conscience, though it did nothing to diminish the magnitude of Isabella's crimes. She had systematically betrayed state secrets for over 3 decades, regardless of her motivations or what she had done with the payment. The Asturian negotiations, Edmund said, showing her another document. What have you told them about our strategy? Isabella looked genuinely pained as she responded. Everything they asked for. Details about your negotiating position, information about the concessions you're willing to make, intelligence about Astoria's own strategic interests that you've shared with me. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Isabella had compromised not just Valdoria's interests, but potentially Astoria's as well, since the information she had provided to Mordania could be used against both kingdoms in future negotiations. Is there anything at all, that you haven't shared with them? Edmund asked. Isabella considered carefully before answering. Military deployments and specific security protocols. I drew the line at intelligence that could directly endanger lives. Edmund supposed he should be grateful for this small mercy, though it hardly mattered given the massive scope of the damage she had already caused. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 34 years of deception settling between them like a chasm that could never be bridged. Finally, Edmund spoke the words that would officially end their marriage and Isabella's life as queen consort. You will leave Ravencrest Palace immediately, he said, his voice carrying the full authority of the crown. You will be escorted to a secure location where you will remain under house arrest, pending formal proceedings against you for high treason. Isabella had been expecting this, but hearing the words still seemed to affect her deeply. What about Alexander and Catherine? Can I see them before? No, Edmund replied firmly. Your contact with our children is permanently severed. They will be told that you have suffered a mental breakdown and have been removed to a private facility for treatment. They will never know the truth about what you've done. Isabella's composure finally cracked completely, and tears began streaming down her face. Edmund, please, they're my children too. Whatever I've done, I love them more than life itself. If you had truly loved them, you wouldn't have spent their entire lives betraying everything they represent, Edmund replied coldly. You've forfeited any right to call yourself their mother. The cruelty of his words seemed to pierce Isabella more deeply than any formal punishment could have. She doubled over in her chair, sobbing with the grief of a mother being permanently separated from her children. Despite everything she had done, despite the magnitude of her betrayal, Edmund felt his heart break a little watching her suffer. This was still the woman who had held his children as babies, who had comforted them through childhood fears and celebrated their achievements. Whatever else she had been a loving mother, and severing that bond would cause pain that went beyond any legal punishment. But the security of the realm had to come first. Isabella's continued presence in the palace, her continued contact with their children, represented an unacceptable risk. Too much damage had already been done. Edmund couldn't allow sentiment to compromise his duty as king. A soft knock at the study door interrupted the painful scene. Lord Chancellor Hartwell entered with 2 members of the royal security detail, their presence making it clear that Isabella's time as queen consort had officially ended. It's time, Your Majesty, Hartwell said quietly. Isabella rose from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster, wiping the tears from her face and straightening her dress. For a brief moment, she looked like the regal woman Edmund had married, and he felt a pang of loss for the life they might have had together if any of it had been real. Edmund, she said as the guards moved to escort her from the room, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But please believe me when I say that despite everything else, despite all the lies, my love for you and our children was the only true thing in my life. Edmund watched as the woman who had shared his life for over 3 decades was led away in disgrace, her royal titles stripped, her future uncertain. The palace felt immediately different without her presence, as though the very foundations had shifted. Alone in his study once again, Edmund surveyed the evidence scattered across his desk, the remnants of a marriage and a life built on deception. The investigation would continue, the damage assessments would be conducted, and formal legal proceedings would determine Isabella's ultimate fate. But the personal cost had already been paid. King Edmund Ashworth had lost not just a wife, but his faith in his own judgment, his trust in those closest to him, and his belief that love could exist without the shadow of betrayal. As the sun set over Ravencrest Palace, a new chapter began for the Kingdom of Valdoria, one in which the crown would be more guarded, more suspicious, and forever changed by the knowledge that even the deepest bonds of love and trust could be weapons in the hands of those willing to use them.